Hello! It's been a while since I last recorded a video. So I'm at Standsted Airport once again with the Airbus A320. This is the fly-by-wire Airbus A320 with the experimental mod installed. So this is the latest and greatest community-built version of the A320. So let's go and have a look inside, and we'll go through setting the aircraft up. We're going to do a short flight, but we'll get it powered up first before we do anything else. Okay, the first thing we're going to do once we get on board the airplane is go and turn the battery on. That'll give us some power. We've got external power available up here, so we can switch that on, and that provides power to everything. We can turn the APU on, so we're just doing that there. We can turn the IRS to on. Normally there would be a delay associated with the IRS system, which is why you would do it first normally. And the next thing we're going to do essentially is go and wait for the APU to come up to speed. So while we're waiting for that, we're going to turn the engineering displays on. You can see while we're waiting for APU, the ECAM screen for it has automatically come up. If that wasn't up, you can just click the APU button here, but it does certain sequences automatically because they're useful to do. So we'll turn the brightnesses up on the screens while we're here, while we're waiting. Whoops. Oh yeah, that's both of those done. Turn those screens over there up. So you'll see those numbers increase when it's providing power. There it goes. Okay, so now the APU is running, we can provide compressed air to the engines, so we could start them. So normally you wouldn't do this until pushback, but I'm going to start them now anyway. So before we can start the engines, we need to turn the fuel pumps on. We're also going to turn the cruise supply of air on while we're here. We'll also need to turn on the APU bleed. So this is the compressed air from the APU to the engines to spin them up. So in order for that to happen, we have to come back down and turn the engines to start mode. Notice when we did that, the screen has changed down here to show engines. And we can actually start both at once, which isn't tremendously accurate. So there you go, it's firing up both engines. If we didn't have APU bleed, they would stall out at about 25%. But because we've got the fuel pump switched on and we've got APU bleed, you can see that the fuel flow is coming into the engines, and you can hear them coming up to speed now. So they've actually fired up. So while they were quiet spinning up, that was just the compressed air spinning them round. When you actually hear them burst into life, that's the fuel kicking in and the engine igniters. Okay, so we've got some things to deal with here. Parking brake is on, TCAS is on standby. So we can go down here and we can turn TCAS to TARA and turn it to on the master switch. It's also telling us APU bleed is on, and the ADIR's SWTG. So I've accidentally knocked this switch here. That's the ADIR's SWTG switch. So down here as well, it will be complaining in a moment that we don't have predictive wind shear on, so that's that switch there. So we've preempted it and done it before it complains about it. We can also move the flaps to our takeoff position. The engines are up and running now. So we have no use for the APU now, because the engines are providing electrical power and they don't need to be spun up by the APU bleed. So APU bleed comes off, APU comes off, external power is off. So let's go and turn some lights on. Strobe lights, beacon lights, no smoking lights, seat belts, and nose lights for takeoff. And that's pretty much it. Or we can turn the wing lights on as well. Okay, so we are going to be taking off. If we go and have a look at a map now, because we're going to go and program the MCDU. We're going to be taking off from Standsted. You can see we're sat on the ground near the end of runway 22. We're going to be taking off runway 22. We're going to be flying the LAM 3R departure. So let's go and have a look in the MCDU and see how we program that. So we're going to go straight into MCDU. You can see it comes up with a page of information about versions of things. There's a GPS primary thing there, you can clear that. So we're going to go to initialize. We're going to go from EGSS and we're going to fly over to Biggin Hill, and the code for Biggin Hill is EGKB. Echo Golf Kilo Bravo. So we'll put that in and it comes up with the page confirming it, and we go back. We can look in IRS initialization, but it's already done. It's not something you have to do manually anymore. We can put in our cost index. We'll just put in 50. Cost index is actually a formula in the real aircraft, and you put numbers in according to how much you want to derate the engines to not burn fuel, essentially. So cruise flight level. If we look, we're going to go a very, very short distance. So we're only going to go as far as 5,000 feet. So we could put 50, but we can type 5,000 and it converts it into a flight level for us. Okay, so that's the basics done. You will see there's a marker there saying there are more pages here. So there are things you can put in, like the zero fuel weight. And if you just click the button next to it, it pre-fills it for you. So it works it out based on the aircraft. So that's all we have to do there. So next thing we would do is go to flight plan. And you can see there's a massive discontinuity in between the departure and the destination airfield at the moment, because we haven't done anything. So if we go to EGSS, choose our departure, we're leaving on runway 22, and then it will give us a choice of the SID, the standard instrument departure. So we want LAM 3R. So we can push this in that direction. There we go, LAM 3R. And let's see, runway 22, LAM 3R. And insert. You can see it's still showing a discontinuity in the flight plan before we get to EGKB. But before we do anything about that, let's go and click on EKGB and go to the arrival. And again, ILS for runway 21 is fine. We're not going to use a star because there are none that make sense for this. So we're just going to insert that. So let's go and have a look through this now. So it shows us coming into various waypoints along the way. Now this is quite clever. While you're on the flight plan page, you can switch this main display to plan mode. When you go to plan mode and you flick through steps, so we can see for each step we're on, it's D145I, and then we go on to Rowan, and then on to LAM, and then on to CF21, then on to FF21, and into the destination. Okay, so that's all looking good. I was anticipating having to insert some more waypoints, but it's done a pretty good flight plan, and there's no discontinuities to speak of, so we can just go with it. Okay, so we're going to need to be pushed back. We shouldn't have the engines on before pushback, but we'll let that go. Oh, before we do roll, let's go and set up the master control panel for the autopilot before we get started. So we'll go and set a manual speed, even though we're not going to use it, of 220. This is really just fallback numbers, so if you do have to go to manual, they're already on something sensible. The runway we're taking off from, if we were to go to selected mode, which is the bottom half of the switches, selected, you're pulling the knobs. I heard a great reference about this the other day. You think about it, if you pull the knob, you're pulling it towards you, you are making the decision. If you push the knobs, you are telling the aeroplane you want it to make the decision, but it can't do it unless it's got a flight plan. So 220 we're taking off on, aren't we? So let's just spin the heading round to 220. So again, this is just being careful that if we did have to come out of managed mode, it's already on 220. So altitude, we're going to climb straight out to 5,000 feet. And you can see it's going by managed mode to get there. We could go selected mode, and then we could go and choose the rate we want to get there at, but we'll go managed mode. Okay. So having done all of that, we're now going to say, well, we'll let the heading do what it wants to do, and we're actually going to put the speed into managed mode as well when we get there. So can we move this out of the way? No, we can't. So let's get the parking brake off, press Shift and P, and we should see the trolley go in and start pushing the aeroplane back. So we are going to taxi around to this runway here for our flight. Hopefully the other airplanes will be out of the way. Well, one of them's just disappeared completely. Hopefully those other airplanes will be out of the way by the time we get there, which would be useful. That 747 appears to be levitating. So the trolley should grab hold of us any moment and start pushing us, and there it goes. Just while we're waiting for pushback, if we go and have a quick look, you will notice alongside the flight plan there are speeds and altitudes. If you wanted to change any of them and set speeds and altitudes, all you need to do is click on the button next to them and you fill in the boxes. Okay? So you can very specifically program your speed and altitudes through the route if you want to. But usually if you're choosing a well-known SID and star, it will all be pre-programmed in for you with the various limits for the route. So let's take Shift P and stop the pushback. Give him a chance to get out of the way. Throttle forwards a tiny bit. We haven't set the QNH either. I've just pressed B to shortcut that, so it's set the QNH for us for the accurate current QNH. Let's set this back to arc mode, and yeah, we'll keep the range at 10 miles until we've taken off, and then we'll increase it. So yeah, that 747 is now rolling again, so he should be out of our way by the time we get there, which is really good. Okay, let's just center our screen up. Okay, we're not using ATC, so we can just get on with doing what we're doing and talk along the way. So center the plane up on the runway. Final check around, flaps are in takeoff position. Air brakes are retracted, flaps are good, wheel brakes off, let's go. So I've pushed the throttle all the way forwards. We can turn the speed. As soon as we're airborne, we can turn the speed into managed speed mode. The auto throttle has kicked in already, so it's in toga mode at the moment. You can see that marked here. I'm going to let go of the stick to point with the mouse, and then it's drifting. So I'm going to pull back, gear up, flaps up, and autopilot engaged. Now you can see the light has come on over here. I switched it on with a switch on my joystick. I'm going to pull the throttle back now. I have pulled the throttle back to an extent where it's on this detent. Okay, so as soon as I did that, this switched to speed mode. and the auto throttle kicked in, so it's going to try and get to 220 knots. Now I'm going to switch now to managed speed mode, and it will go for 250 knots at managed speed mode, because anything below 10,000 feet is going to go the fastest it can, which is 250 knots. You can see the plane is already banking and turning. One of the major differences of the experimental version is this has been completely rewritten, so it's accurate. So this very much more represents the real aircraft, and the way the velocity change indicator is drawn is much more accurate as well. Yeah, you can see the arrow is showing the rate of acceleration. So generally the arrow points at the speed you will be doing in a number of seconds. I think it's 6 seconds on the real Airbus. Okay, so we're coming up to Rowan. So if we zoom out, we should be able to see our entire route, because it's a very short route. Yeah. So we're just coming up to 5,000 feet. As soon as we get there, we're going to actually start descending back down. So while we're doing this, let's go and have a little look at the information for Biggin Hill. So show information for, if you can click on it, show information for Biggin Hill. And we can see here the elevation is 547 feet. So we want to be about 3,000 feet when we come into the ILS. That's all we're really interested in. So you can see the plane is already banking for the next part of the route. It's nice and smooth. There's no wallowing around like the built-in or the stock Airbus. Okay, so we're going to start our descent back down to 3,000, and we'll let it do it at the speed it wants. But we're also going to go manage speed mode now and go back down to 200 knots. And giving ourselves plenty of time for it to happen. So you can see, because it's such a big heavy aeroplane, it's going to take an age to do it, and it doesn't want to descend at the same time. So what we can do is pull the air brakes out and watch the vertical speed once it gets to the speed it needs to get to. So its first concern is to get to the target airspeed. So you can see the speed coming off. As soon as we get to the target airspeed, the aircraft will start to descend. While it's doing that, let's go and have a quick look. So on the ILS it's 109.35 for Biggin Hill. So let's just go and double check that. It should have picked it up from the destination. So if we go and look in here, 109.35 is already programmed in. So that would have picked that up from the destination airfield. You would have noticed there on the MCDU it was saying enter destination data. It's basically asking for the QNH temperatures for the destination, which we obviously haven't put in. Okay, so you can see now the rate of descent has dropped markedly because we got the air brakes out and we're at the target airspeed. So it was looking for the airspeed first before it started obeying the altitude. So we can come off the air brake. We can get some flaps out. We could actually at this point, because we can see fairly closely where we are in terms of the glide slope. Let's get some speed off. So I've gone flaps out to the second mark, speed down to 180 knots. The gear can come out already. Let's just go and have a look at this again. So we're fine. So let's zoom in. So we're 10 miles out from the turn towards the runway. let's have a look at this on the landing screen. So yeah, we are now in range of the localizer, so we can see the symbology has come in. So we're below the glide slope. The diamond is still off the range of the vertical scale. And we are to the right of the beam, which is correct. I think, yeah, we can look at these independently, which is great. So you can see, yeah, we are, if you imagine the runway direction is there, we are to the right of it. So it's really useful being able to have both screens independent. So we can take our time now. Let's go and put the wheels, sorry, the landing lights on. Have a look around. There's the City of London over there. You're whistling past. So we're just about 5 miles from the turn. About 20 miles from, or 15 miles from Biggin Hill. So I did everything quite early so we get time to watch all this happen. I guess just to make this a bit more fun, we could come off the autopilot in a moment and make the turn ourselves. And we come off the throttle as well. The warning there is just telling us we're not on the automatic throttle anymore. So you can see the vertical part of the glide slope is starting to slide down the screen, which is great. I've just moved the throttles to make sure that I have control, and yes, I have manual control of the throttles now. So we're just cruising along, we're very gently descending, about 20 feet every 10 seconds or so. So let's just ease the nose up to stop that happening. Not too much. So you can see here the vertical part of the glide slope is lining up, the horizontal marker is coming in as well. So we will turn towards this marker. It's quite windy, but it's going to be a headwind, so it's not a crosswind as such, or there's not much of a crosswind component to it. So let's go and zoom that one in so we can see a lot more easily. So you can see we're going to get to this point and turn right gently, and that should correspond with this coming into the middle. Okay, so you can see the vertical part of the glide slope is in the middle now, so nose down and we chase it basically. And let's start turning right. And right in front of us, in the distance, in the mist, you can see, if we look carefully, there's the runway. So let's just line a few up. So I've moved my view down and zoomed in a little bit more than you normally would, just so we can see the controls easily. Or see the instruments, I should say, not the controls. So at this point, we're just concentrating on keeping a steady speed. We're going to be doing probably 130 knots when we come over the apron, if we get it right. So we can drop the flaps one more. And again to full flaps. You can see we've gone off slightly to the left of the runway line, which is reflected on the instrument, and you can see that out of the window. So we'll just correct for that. Speed is gently coming off. A little bit high. So it's just a case now of keeping an eye on the ILS and following the plane down to the ground. Watching the airspeed, making sure that we stay at about 130 knots. And watching the centre line. It's just balancing things really. Not doing anything hasty, no big movements, nothing in a panic. You can see things edging away from where they should be, so I'm a little bit slow at the moment. And although I'm on the centre line, I'm actually heading right, so I'm going back left slightly to catch that.
1,000.
So again, it's just methodical, scanning the instruments again and again, looking outside, predicting what the aeroplane's doing and countering what it's doing. So we're off to the right slightly, so we'll just correct for that. Slightly above. You usually counter where if you put the nose down you release a little bit of throttle, because if you're going downhill you're going to accelerate. We're getting a bit high. So at this point you're pretty much visual with the runway.
500.
So it's more about watching the speed and just watching the runway.
400. 300. 200. 100. 50. 40. 30. 20. 10. 5.
And we're down. So, thrust reversers on. And thrust reversers off at 70 knots. And brakes gently, flaps up. And we taxi, basically. So we're going to go off to the left. So let's centre the view back up. You can see how zoomed in we were, so we could see the instruments easily. So increase the throttle slightly just to keep us rolling. And we're going to run over a car by the look of it. Okay, so I'm not going to bother taxiing all the way back to the parking, because that's the most boring thing in the world. But there you go, that was a flight in the fly-by-wire experimental build of the A320 in Microsoft Flight Simulator, and we were looking at programming the FMC, doing the basics with it. I didn't put everything, as you saw. We had some warnings about I hadn't put in destination data, but I showed you the basics about putting the flight in, meddling with the FMC, the MCDU, and doing the flight and doing a manual landing. So there you go, I'm going to stop recording there.